Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It is Professor Hamamoto, and the date is August 10, year 2025. The time 4 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. And today I have a fascinating, in-depth discussion, not to the level of nerdishness, but something that I think is going to advance our understanding of why the world is so crazy as it is. So, toward that end, I'm going to be dealing with the Kabbalistic dark magic of wellness Maven. Maven, in case you don't know, is a Yiddish word. Wellness Maven Gwyneth Paltrow, who you all know and love. And I'd like to take this time to thank the Patreon supporters of this channel, the Professor Hamamoto channel, for allowing me to buy fresh off the press the hardback edition of Gwyneth, subtitled The Biography. And it's by Amy Odell. She has mainstream journalistic credentials, the New York Times best-selling. She wrote a bio on Anna Wintour, one of our favorites, right? I'm always name checking my friend Anna Wintour, and I was happy to wave aloha when she got canned. Anna Wintour. Anyway, this woman here has written one about Wintour, and I'm sure I read it. I think I read all the main bios. And these people are very useful in charting the rise, but also to facilitating the exit of some of these characters, like Anna Wintour. There's a fallow moment. There's an arc. There's a whole story narrative arc that's involved in these books, as well as in careers, and that would include our own Gwyneth Paltrow, and it's fully scripted. Now, in the case of Gwyneth Paltrow, there's another dimension that's brought into the story. She alludes to it, Amy Odell. I don't know if I'm pronouncing her name. It could be Odell, but I'm saying Odell, Odell. The other layer, the metaphysical layer, is the Kabbalistic, and it's alluded to here, but she doesn't really tease it out. So, independently of this book, because I had heard some not rumors, but some talk. Oh yeah, I'm from a rabbinic line, I said, okay, so I kept that in the back of my mind, and it's true, because as you'll see in a moment, I think under the sponsorship of one of these genealogy companies that are trying to get our genetic heritage so they can come up with some sort of biopharmaceutical concoctions to be able to sell back our own health to us. Gwyneth Paltrow can trace her background at least for, I think, a great-great-grandfather's generation, and beyond that to a rabbinic line. So she is of the bloodline. She's of the AB bloodline. Of course, these are Ashkenazis, Polish, what's now Poland, that Central European, which would also include, by the way, part of the Khazar, Mongolian, Central Asian steppes people. Those people went to the west and they went to the east. They were going through China. Some say they reached parts of Japan. It's a pretty large diaspora, pre-modern people. And of course, to the Middle East and Northern Africa, and eventually all over the world. And that's where our own Gwyneth Paltrow enters into the picture, because of the spread of this bloodline globally, more specifically to the United States of America by way of the Caribbean, the Bahamas. this bloodline settled into what is now the United States of America and yielded finally the fruit of this generational progression. Her name is Gwyneth. I think her middle name is Edith. I can't really remember. Gwyneth is a Welsh name. I looked into it a little bit. I wanted to see if there's any sort of Druidic overtones to that word, because all these names mean something. Not just something, they're significant. I mean, that's what we're talking about, Kabbalah, after all. It's all words and numbers and decoding. And it's really part of the purview or the ambition of what I call cultural forensics, to decode these stories that are embedded into mainstream representations or non-representation, not just partial representations. That's where someone with my level of expertise comes into play. And it's helped along by the fact that I've had an interest in Jewish mysticism. I don't claim expertise in it. It's a very, very, very deep, profound subject. Right? There are people who specialize in it and still are beginners in trying to plumb the depths of the centuries of scholarship, commentary, glosses upon glosses, not to mention the secular literature. I was just reading an essay about Walter Benjamin and his relationship, his friendship with the great Franz Kafka and Gershom Scholem, the great scholar, who was born and raised in Berlin, by the way, the intellectual capital of the Western world of the time. They were talking about Weimar. And this is, of course, before Gershom Scholem emigrated to Palestine. He was an ideological, a political Zionist. Now, don't put him in that category of the lowercase Zionists of today who are believing and practicing exterminationism, population replacement. Don't confuse them with that. There's different types of Zionism. Gershom Scholem was of the early romantic, idealist, but politically charged socialist Zionist groups that wanted to live in harmony with the existing populations, which included Arabs and Muslims and Christians, of course, which are current, these Christian communities are currently under attack right now. Okay, so let's keep the historical perspective as much as possible intact as we talk about these streams of history. So don't shut out and don't say, well, I know about that. I've heard about Kabbalah. I watched some YouTubes on it. Or I heard somebody talk about Kabbalistic Hollywood and about the occult in the popular culture, right? I read that stuff myself. I'm very much exposed to it. And although I can't claim expertise in Kabbalah or other forms of Jewish mysticism or even Christian mysticism, or even Asian forms of it, including Buddhist thought, because these are all special, these are all academic, these are all scholarly disciplines that I respect. Okay, a lot of people can't even make a distinction between who's a journalist and who's not. You think Steven Crowder is a journalist. You think Jimmy Dore is a journalist. You think Joe Rogan is a journalist. You think Bill Maher is a journalist. But what they have in common is the fact they're all retread comedians. Right? So that's why I'm trying to bring some sanity to this indiscriminate shepherding of the population to certain brands, which we'll be talking about today. And when I say brands, I use it in the double, triple, multifold Kabbalistic layers of meaning. Not just brand in terms of, well, it's Goop, or it's G label, or it's Healthwise, whatever it is, Jessica Alba's brand. Right? I'm talking about that as well, but I'm talking about the brand that's placed on you and on me. Remember, what's his name? Keith Rainier, the self-reported smartest man in the world. And by the way, he was hooked up with some heavy Seagram family people, right? You know the story. He's in prison right now, pondering his fate. But he would brand women. Yeah, right in the vaginal area. Right, which I think, if I'm not mistaken, Gwyneth Paltrow has some sort of influence on the female anatomy. She was even promoting women to put so-called vaginal eggs into their womanhood. Now, if that's not Sabbatian Frankism, I don't know what is. The desecration of the human body, the sacred female body, in the guise of liberation and of self-satisfaction and expression. It's an inversion. And where does this inversion comes from? It comes from the Sabbatian Frankist bloodline, of which one Gwyneth Paltrow is an inheritor to that line. Eureka! We made a discovery. So now all the people on YouTube can watch me and say, oh yeah, I knew that. She's a Sabbatian. I knew that. Well, you didn't really flesh it out. Pardon the pun. And again, I've read my Gershom Scholem, or as he was known in Germany, Gerhard, a scholar of the highest level. Right. This guy, I mean, he's born and bred in Germany, so he knew the German. He knew Hebrew, probably, I'm assuming, classical Greek, and all the modern languages, French, English, of course. He was fluent in English. I read that. I read that. I remember I was 20 years old or 21. I was given the book when I went to a academic conference for the Popular Culture Association. There was a conference in Detroit City, right close to the Hotel Pontchartrain. And I was just talking to, they have booksellers, displays there. So you go in there and between sessions and you talk to people. And I was talking to this one man who represented Shock. And I said, well, this is really fascinating material you represent. It's all Jewish mysticism too. These are all English language translations from German, right? Brought in. So I asked the guy, I said, what's the story behind Shock? Because, I knew about Faber and Faba, or Faber and Faber. I knew about Modern Library and all the big names, right? But I didn't really know much about Shock. And he said, well, this guy, Frederick Schocken, was an immigrant from Germany. He brought all this material here, and he had it translated. And that stuff still, so that was I got a book on German because I helped this guy. He said, I'm going to go and take a smoke. Could you watch my booth here while I'm gone for about 10 minutes? I said, okay, I'll be glad to. She's like, it's so no one will steal any books or something. So I said, sure, I'll just sit there. So when I came back, he said, hey, why don't you take yourself some books? He said, so I got the history of Jewish mysticism. I got Gershom Scholem wrote a book on Zabbatai Zev, which I still have. I have a new copy, but this has never been out of print. So it's something I can recommend to you. It's not for laymen, but it's not for super specialists either. But I'm trying to establish here is that there is a cultural historical weight, a gravitas, if you want to call it, that underlies this pop culture phenomenon called Gwyneth Paltrow. All right. So I'm going to try. By the way, is my audio on? Looks like it's on. Okay. I checked it before I went on. All right. So we're going to talk about the not too much in depth, but we're going to talk about the missing foundational roots of Gwyneth Paltrow, how she became, I think she's around in her mid 40s now, something like that. I mean, she's been around for decades now. We grew up, or not me, I was aged out of following the stars, but if you're a generation younger than me, you grew up with Gwyneth Paltrow. You remember her from the film Emma, which was a Jane Austen adaptation. And you remember when she won the Academy Award for Shakespeare in Love. I think she was something like 24 years old. Sorry if I get some of the ages wrong. You can correct me if you're a nitpicker down below, but just reading the book. Why do I need to repeat? This is not a book report like we used to do in grade school. This is a critique. So I'm trying to put the book in a larger context, not just repeat information that you already can access easily yourself by reading the darn thing or even by watching YouTubes. Right. So if that's all you're in it for, then please switch over to Candace Owens or somebody, because they also talk a lot faster. And that's part of the programming. It bypasses the rational mind if you talk over so many BPMs or beats per minute. It's all calculated. It's all been figured out by the behavioral scientists. But if you want to ponder ideas and if you want to mull over the inner significance of one Gwyneth Paltrow, then hang on to the show here. Because this is what she promises you and me, the public. Oh, I'm going to put you in touch with your higher self. Does she mention God or the God of Abraham, out of which he is descended? No, because she's turned away from it. And what has she substituted in its place? Something called wellness. If nothing else, after having watched my talk today, when you hear someone on TubeU utter the term wellness, you will immediately go into the gag reflex. Now, Ellen is gone, so we don't have to worry about that. Oprah's gone. They're kind of exiting the stage one by one. Right? And there's a new crop that are being built up to take their place. And Gwyneth Paltrow is en route to becoming a matron. That is a matron. Like her mother, Blythe Danner, who was always a lady. Even when she was Gwyneth Paltrow's age of 24, 25. Because that was my introduction to the Danner family through Blythe Danner. I knew her as an actress. I would see her in films, and she didn't have these starring things. She's, as we know from here, she's mostly a theatrical actor. She's an artist who takes herself, her craft, her art seriously. But she kind of had to hold back where it came to her daughter, because her daughter, we're talking about Gwyneth, of course, stated early on, someone asked her, because, her mother was an actress, right? A very well-regarded, not just me, a well-regarded Broadway actor. Some prefer saying actor instead of actress, so I'll just say actor. Okay. because we've neutered or tried to neuter the language. But Gwyneth Paltrow was asking, do you want to be an actress like your mother? Because you ask kids that when they, still kind of finding themselves, I guess. Says, no, I want to be a movie star. I want to be So early on, she knew what the difference was, and she pursued. And as we'll find out in a moment, after a while, she got bored of movies. Well, the truth is, she aged out of all the ingenue roles, because she's moving into the matron phase of life, which is okay. Why resist? Aging is inevitable. So she had to find a new gig, and that's where the Goop phase of her life is coming. Well, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's take a look at, just to whet our appetite, let's take a look at her working conditions, which she feels are so oppressive with all the responsibilities she had. She's a mother too, and the people, it's all parodied in this book, by the way, and I'll try to keep the sarcasm to a minimum, as I've already promised. But she was always being called out for saying, yeah, the women, I wish I had a 9-to-5 job, because at least I knew, what my schedule is. Blah, blah. She always found something to complain about. In Yiddish, it's called Kvitch. I'm sure her father, Bruce Paltrow, would know the term, because when he was growing up, whenever he'd complain, his dad, his mother would say, Kvitch, Kvitch, Kvitch. Because that was the bloodline. The deal in this book here, this is what the book misses, okay, while I'm on the topic, is that it's supposed to be a marriage between a super wasp family, the Danner family, Blythe Danner. And if you've seen pictures of her, she looks like she's from the magazine of the 1930s, Town and Country, and she's from Connecticut. She is what was used to be referred to as WASP, White Anglo-Saxon Protestant, whereas Paltrow comes from Eastern European, Polish, Jewish, working class people who had, a line of scholars on his great grandmother's side as well, right? So that's supposed to be like a cultural clash or a cultural combination that resulted in a Gwyneth Paltrow. But my contribution, this is what this author, Odell, missed, is that I think the Danner family also was Jewish. They were not Anglo-Saxon. They are, this is my suspicion, right? It takes you researchers to go into the archives to confirm my hypothesis. Because remember, Gwyneth Paltrow is the result of a breeding program, a bloodlines program. It's what's called positive eugenics. And by the way, during Nazi Germany, there were a lot of Jewish eugenicists. I hate to break it to you. It wasn't just an evil Nazi science, right? But within the Jewish community itself, they may not have called it eugenics, but there was a notion of blood. So the Danner family and beyond, earlier than that, you had some other names. I think they were what are referred to as conversos or marranos. There's different terms for it. These are people who are forcibly or by choice converted to Christianity for any number of reasons, right? Just like Cristoforo Colombo or Christopher Columbus, he was Jewish as well. Did you know that? No, you don't. We didn't learn that. He was a converso. There are tons of presidents of the United States who were part Jewish, at least, and some were part Black. So America has been really a multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-religious republic from the get-go. Now, if you're a yellow person or native, you might have a little bit more time on your hands before you're integrated into the system. But that process might be unfolding right now. Look at Mark Zuckerberg and Priscilla Chan. Who knows? By the time the American society had evolved to the point where when Bruce Paltrow, that's her father, who died fairly young, but he was only 58 years old, he died like a minch. He bore it stoically, just like his father, whose name was Buster, by the way. So he was some hard-ass dude, and his grandfather, and he died of throat cancer, man. He was 58 years old. That was Bruce Paltrow. But the point is, see, I'm the same generation, but I witnessed in my own lifetime how the barriers against Roman Catholicism dropped to the point where John Fitzgerald Kennedy could be elected to the presidency of the United States of America. In the same way with Jews, the barriers were lowered. Right. Where it comes to the yellows, it still hasn't happened yet because we don't matter. We're not even in the picture. We're just somebody that you can just kind of take for granted. Right. Just like when you go to the pharmacy and there's a yellow woman there filling your prescription, you can take her for granted. You go to the hospital, you see nothing but yellow, you see nothing but Filipinos, but they're serving you. So you're like Gwyneth Paltrow. They don't exist for you. Just like the British Prince Andrew. Do you think his domestic help registered to him as human beings? No, they don't. So the Paltrow family had gone through that. And by the time you have supposedly the Danners and the Paltrows coming together, this social prejudice had dropped. So it's a non-issue. But my argument is that it's still an issue. It's not as salient as it is, as it was in the past, but there's still a bloodlines eugenic component to the rise of one Gwyneth Paltrow. Right. She's the product of a breeding program, and this is one of the reasons why she has been allowed to rise to the top and to maintain that status for as long as she has. And beyond, if she plays it right, she will have matron status like your Jacqueline Onassis or Schlossberg, as she later became. And she was part Jewish to begin with herself, Onassis, right, through the Alkenklaus family. So there's all these different tributaries, racial, ethnic, religious, that run through the power elite of American society. That's why I was never satisfied by using the terminology of so-called ethnic studies. Oh, it's white. This is white privilege. That's black. That's Asian. This is yellow. That's Latino. That's Latinx. It's a lot more complex than that. It's been oversimplified purposely for control primarily, but there are other reasons for that as well. So here's a quick preview of the working conditions of Gwyneth Paltrow, her office of Goop. We're talking about now 00. I'm trying to look at for the Kabbalistic significance or symbology of the 00. Maybe you can tell me. I mean, I know the definition of Goop. I think it's a sort of a Sabbatian Frankist intentional insult, like pissing on people and telling them, oh, don't worry, it's just raining. Right? We want you to slather your face with goop, with crap, with crud, with schmutz. That's a Yiddish word as well. And you're going to pay us for that. You're going to pay us a lot of money. And you're going to put a so-called Oriental. So this is how the Orientals and the yellow people fit in. We're sort of a fashion accessory to people like Gwyneth Paltrow. We'll get your jade egg and you can put it in your pussy and you're going to pay it for us. Looks like something like this. I didn't realize they had one. It's just quartz. I'm not a crystal worshiper like these people, these new agers who believe in manifesting material wealth. That's where the magic comes in. But I like crystals. Why crystals comes out of nature? Why can't I appreciate nature? Why do I have to go through the new age? Why do I have to have it brokered through Gwyneth Paltrow? Why do I set herself up as the middleman? And a dear friend of mine told me, it hit me, it slapped me. It was a bitch slap, and I was the bitch. She said, "Why do you create your own middleman?" I said, "Wow, that's right. That's what I'm doing. Why am I doing that? I don't need no middleman." Anyway, here's the crystal. You can get it yourself for $1 on whatever the retailer, Jeff Bezos or whoever, Etsy, whatever it is. This is probably not the right size. It's too small, but you could probably fit it in your nose or stick it in your ear, some other body cavity, and you could do it for free. You don't even have to subscribe to Gwyneth Paltrow's mailing list. By the way, that's how. See, I'm reading this book and I'm also mining it for business ideas. I'm trying to see how she got over. I have plenty of brilliant ideas, but I don't have the bloodline. You understand? I'm not a member of the tribe. And that's cool. I don't need to be. I'm just saying that the skids are greased if you have that lineage. Right? Because you have lots of good ideas, but are you going to ever be able to bring them to market? Are you ever going to get your shelf space there in the retail? Are you going to even get your name on a book published or an article placed with Vogue magazine or Vanity Fair? Doubtful. Highly doubtful. If you're Amy Odell, you would, because her daddy's probably a Wall Streeter. She's I'm pretty sure she went to prep school and she went to some liberal arts college. She probably went to Smith, and she got an internship for the New York Times or New Yorker magazine, and gradually worked her way into a contract. I'm just telling you this. This is how American culture and society operates. This is all part of culture forensics. We're talking about an engineered synthetic construct here that we're, and me, myself as well, I include myself in this critique, we accept it as being organic and genuine and authentic. And as the word goes these days, relatable. So let's expunge that from our lexicon. Relatable. What was the other word I used? I can't remember, but these are all buzzwords that as soon as you hear them, run the other way. Anyway, here is our own dear Gwyneth Paltrow, the woman of the century. I mean, nobody likes her. But she realized it, and she's crying all the way to the bank that no one likes her. Here we go.
Yeah, but it's for so don't put that in. This is my office. Nice little corner office. It's very comfortable and bright. I keep some books in here for inspiration. This is a painting that my best friend Mary made for me. This is a painting that my husband gave me that he did a long time ago. This looks like the clean plate in Czech, maybe? Japanese version. When Women Lead, written by Julia Bornstein. She's an amazing CNBC business reporter, very well respected. It's a really good book.
How would you describe your office style?
You can pretty much find me in G-Label every single day of the week, which makes sense considering I make it. I would say that I look polished and comfortable. This is actually my favorite skirt of the season. The material is really beautiful. It's kind of got a little bit of a heavier weight for fall, and I'm excited to wear it with like a big, scrumptious, heavy knit and boots. As you can see, my desk is just kind of a big table. So I tend to just have my computer. I always have my notebook. I have some teas over here. I always have a candle burning in the office. It's like a tiny fireplace. And then I usually have product that we are working on. This is not out yet. This is our Shine Bath mask. It's really hard to get hair products that are clean and non-toxic to work really well, especially on damaged hair. So This I'm very proud of. And here are our new color balms, skincare, but it's makeup. So we have these beautiful pigments and the color's very buildable. So you can start light and then really get the color on quite brightly if you want to. Goop Sex Oil. It smells really good. It's in a very chic, discreet bottle. Well, it looks like my Goop kitchen has arrived. If you'll excuse me, I have a gorgeous salmon teriyaki bowl to eat. Bye. This is my office.
Wow, aren't you filled with envy? Don't you wish you were feasting at this very moment on a salmon teriyaki bowl? By the way, the people in probably China, I don't know about China, but definitely in Japan, they buy this stuff. They're totally enamored of American celebrity culture. And I've lived there, I've been there, I've taught there, and I try to explain to them, where it's coming from, where it doesn't really matter. They'll buy it anyway. But I forgot to mention the fact that on a global level, the so-called wellness industry is worth $6.3 trillion per year. That's with a T, trillion. I researched this and prepping, and I said, I got to find out more about the wellness industry. So I found some data. I'm looking at some reports because, I'm gangster. I'm a yellow gangster, right? So I got to get in on this action. I'm always checking out the casinos. I'm seeing the Indian places. I go over to Malaysia, go to Singapore, go to Macau, go to Las Vegas. I would just want to see how to get over. So I said, I'm going to check out the wellness industry. I already have product names set up for my creams. Like one's going to be called Snatch. The other one's going to be called Muff. The other one's going to be called Testicles. I mean, I got a whole line of stuff here. I'm even going to start a celebrity underwear rental service. You just put your checked off, and it's all going to be app based, of course. And you can pick Gwyneth Paltrow. It could be any of her rivals. It could be Martha Stewart, because they was in conflict a little bit because Martha Stewart feeling a little bit competitive on her younger rival. By the way, Gwyneth Paltrow, as you know, probably got a lot of her ideas from the Martha Stewart phenomenon. By the way, she's also Jewish. Did you know that, Martha Stewart? So there's this whole WASP sort of Ralph Lauren, who's also Jewish, by the way, his name is Ralph Lipsitz. There's this sort of goy worship, WASP worship sort of duality that's going on here in the popular culture, right? And the women in Japan and now the ones in China are eating it up. They don't really understand the history behind it, but they're content to provide the slave labor to make these little products because they're not made in the U.S. Are you kidding me? Most of these luxury handbags, the scandal. It was exposed online on TikTok, which is a Chinese product, that most of this stuff, like 90% of it, is made in China. It's MIC. So here we go. Let's go, since we're on the celebrity kick right now, let's take a look at the next one.
Celebrity flees. Gwyneth Paltrow's Hamptons, home after catastrophic diarrhea. The shocking truth. Insiders have identified socialite Derek Blasberg as the guest who suffered a bowel incident at Gwyneth Paltrow's Hamptons home, initially blamed on Ozempic. Blasberg, a well-connected media personality, allegedly fled the scene without facing repercussions. The mishap became a hot topic among the Hamptons elite, with Paltrow reportedly sharing the story with friends like Oprah and Larry David. Despite Ozempic's known side effects, the incident was not drug-induced. Blasberg frequently visits Paltrow and mingles with high-profile celebrities, making the scandal particularly notable among their social circles.
Well, I suppose he's going to be uninvited from a lot of the visits to these homes of the rich and famous. What he could do, I think what Gwyneth Paltrow can do is this is for her friends who are on Ozempic. Maybe she's on it too herself, who have these, what they call catastrophic diarrhea. She can come up with something like a butt plug. How's that? That would be a really good addition. So you can just shove it in your ass and take Ozempic and party all night long until you're ready to evacuate yourself. All right. So to continue with our Gwyneth Paltrow tribute, and we'll talk about her rabbinical roots that made it all possible. It's a manifestation, right? You've heard the term manifestation. It's all very new age, but it's really goes back to Kabbalistic dark magic, right? Oprah was into it. All these talk show mavens are into manifestation. They're not into the God of Abraham. Heaven forbid. They might be involved with some Hindu love gods or Buddhism, but mostly it's New Age, Luciferian manifestation. Here she is.
Paltrow's lifestyle company has agreed to pay a six-figure settlement for false advertising. A lawsuit filed by prosecutors from 10 California counties claims Goop did not have scientific backing for health claims about 3 online products. CBS News correspondent Anna Werner has more on the dispute and Goop's response to the allegations.
People have been selling snake oil for a long time. This is just another type of snake oil.
Orange County District Attorney Tony Rackauckus says Gwyneth Paltrow's company Goop is guilty of false advertising. A task force settlement announced Wednesday focused on 3 products sold by Goop. 2 are vaginal eggs that were promoted as a way to balance hormones, regulate menstrual cycles, and increase bladder control. The third, a mix of essential oils, was advertised as a way to help prevent depression. Prosecutors alleged the descriptions were not supported by competent and reliable scientific evidence.
There's a group of people who have problems like that, and they might be vulnerable. A lot of people might do the things that you suggest, and so you can do a lot of harm by falsely advertising that something is a medical cure.
In agreeing to the $145,000 settlement, Goop called the dispute an honest disagreement. It says it provides a forum for users to present their views on the products, but the law sometimes views statements like this as advertising claims, which are subject to legal requirements. We appreciate the task force's guidance.
Health and wellness is a very hot industry, and part and parcel with that, we're seeing a significant rise in misleading and deceptive marketing claims.
Bonnie Patton is executive director of Truth in Advertising and says Goop is.
And so it goes. I don't know how much money's at the is actually going to be paid out, but the fact is that they got a wrist slapper, Gwyneth Paltrow, Goop, but they'll keep selling their little devices, including their little vaginal eggs. Remember that early comedy of our friend Woody Allen, the Woodman, Woodrow Königsberg, his name is? He's Jewish. Did you know that? There's a scene where Woody Allen, he gets jilted by his 20-year-old girlfriend, just like every other movie, right? And he sees an old couple, they're very happy, and asks them what the secret to their marriage is. And the old man goes, or the lady goes, vibrating eggs. So here it is. I myself am going to come out with my own line designer label, Professor Hamamoto Vibrating Butt Plugs. How's that? Be sure to join my mailing list. Subscribe to my YouTube channel so you can be one of the first persons to receive notification of my line of Professor Hamamoto autoerotic devices. Right? I think that's gonna. I think that can be a real winner. In fact, my name is, I've already endorsed. I don't have any participation on a profit level. I have, I'm in this commercial for a yellow dildo. It's on YouTube if you want to check it out. You think I'm kidding? It's there. Maybe I'll download it and show it in a future show. So I'm very well acquainted with hype and marketing and the psychology, the neurolinguistic programming, but this whole connection between the Sabbatian Frankist, Isakaluria, dark magic stuff with Paltrow, that was a discovery for me. It made reading this book worthwhile. Because when I got it, I said, do I have to read this? I wanted to hate the book, and I do by and large. I know it's well written. The book itself is not a problem, but I want to read about Gwyneth Paltrow and her problems, her non-problems. I don't read about the fact that she went to private school in West LA and Santa Monica, Spence School. I don't want to read about her daughter, Apple, who got in trouble in high school. I think she went to Crossroads High School. I had a student who went to Crossroads High School at UC Davis, so I knew she was upper class. Usually those women go to USC. They can't get into the University of California on an academic level. But that's all in here. If you want to read about the lifestyles of the rich and famous on the west side of LA, Santa Monica, Brentwood, Beverly Hills, and all that, it's here. But it's also, she has this dual life on the East Coast, New York City, Connecticut, the Hamptons, all that stuff. So she's a bi-coastal Nepo baby. And all that information is there for your delectation. So we have a wellness industry on a global level that's worth $6.3 trillion US dollars. But I failed to mention the fact that in the US market alone, that's worth $1.8 trillion. So you can laugh all you want and make bad puns about Gwyneth Paltrow. That's not going to hurt her one bit because she's making bank. She'll have a really nice retirement nest egg, pardon the pun, by the time it's all over, right? And here's the news for you investor type people, all right? And if you want to invest in Professor Hamamoto, subscribe or join the Patreon or both, right? That's how you can invest in my enterprise, my designer autoerotic devices. Right, batteries not included. I think I'm going to go rechargeable, USB-C, solar, or have it so that you can recharge your vibrator at a electric vehicle station in the Tesla. In fact, Tesla, maybe I can cut a deal with Elon Musk and come up with some electric-powered autoerotic devices under the Tesla brand. I mean, this is America, ladies and gentlemen. The opportunities are limitless. Look, there was 1 million illegal immigrants that came to the United States just within the last few years. And they're here for the one thing. They want to make bank. They know that fortunes can be made and lost in the United States of America by selling candles that smell like your cooch. Right? Only in America, as Don King used to say. So the domestic market for wellness is $1.8 trillion, and it's growing by, guess what? 9% per year. So that is a healthy industry. Of course, it'll flatten out after a while. And you might, if you're already just learning about this, you're already behind the curve. But let's say if you are into sound therapy, which, by the way, Gwyneth Paltrow is involved in that. Anything that's trendy or it's about to become trendy, Gwyneth Paltrow has already been read into it. It's like the guys who write and produce The Simpsons. They're brought into the room, and say, well, this is what we're going to push over the next 18 months cycle. And you can start pushing this forward on your mailing list or on episodes of The Simpsons. All right. So this is why it's important to read this information, to look at the patterns, to understand their approach and what underlies it, so that we can circumvent it or walk away from it and just opt out of it. Obviously, consumer awareness is not at the level that we would hope if the so-called wellness industry, which 99% of it is hype or common sense. Yeah, I know what teriyaki chicken and salmon is. I was raised, I grew up on it. I know what tofu is. Do you think you discovered it, Gwyneth Paltrow? Is it okay now that yellow people can eat our own food that we grew up on for generation and generation because you, Gwyneth Paltrow, says it's cool? I don't need your approval, girl. So anyway, if you can get a piece of that action there, more power to you. I'm behind you. Okay, whatever. If you're yellow, brown, black, white, whatever religion you are, get on the gravy train. If Gwyneth Paltrow can do it, you can do it, but you have to know the formula, right? You have to, if you just understand a little bit of the cultural forensics and break it down, you'll get where you want to be. Okay, let's continue. Here's because now that we got all the exciting, scandalous information out of the way, we can talk about the part that interests me, which is not Gwyneth Paltrow per se. I'm more interested in her grandparents, the immigrant generation. I'm more interested in her great grandparents. I'm more interested in their great great grandparents. I'm interested in her family when they were in the shtetl in what is now Poland, right? Which, by the way, was the huge recruiting ground of the Sabbatian movement, the Frankist movement. And I've told you before on the show, all those people moved to the U.S. during the great migration of the late 19th century, early 20th century to cities like New York and Chicago. I'm talking about the Jewish diaspora, the ones that invented the film business and the movie business and the publishing business and the finance industries. If they didn't invent it, they certainly refined it and crafted it in a way to say, this is ours, baby. It's ours. Don't come near it. You stay away. So that's her. I'm sure Gwyneth Paltrow doesn't think about it in these terms, but her father did. Her grandfather, Butch, was a metals guy. Scrap metal. He was a scrap and metal dealer. He was just a cigar chopping, hard-ass Jewish businessman, which was the norm back in those days. I know, I grew up around them. They were my friends' fathers too. They were like that. They ran junkyards. And then their sons and daughters went to med school. After that, there's an easier way to make a living. It's called being a lawyer. All right. So I understand the social history. So here's the part where Gwyneth Paltrow goes in to get her genealogy done, and they look through the records, and lo and behold, the family legend turns out to be true. She comes from a line of not just rabbis, which is cool enough as it is, because, they're into scholarship. That's my world. They're into books. That's my world. They're into arguing about how many fairies can dance on the head of a pin. That's my world. I'll argue about anything just for the hell of it. Okay, that's like a seminar. That's like grad school. Okay, so I can dig that part. Okay, not only were they rabbis, but they were Kabbalistic experts. And back then, the masters of the Kabbalah were the cultural arbiters and not lawgivers. That they're not like on the scale of Moses, but they are like the deciders. They're like the judges, the magistrates. all right, within their communities. Right? They had authority, they had standing, they had respect. Okay. And that's still true today, even amongst those who claim to be non-observant Jews or even atheists. They understand the cultural history there. So that's where she comes from, and that's how she gets away with saying, "Okay, you're gonna smell my snatch. I'm gonna put a candle out there, and you can smell my pussy, and you're gonna dig it. I'm gonna charge you $20." So here it is. This is this is the great reveal. I'll just show you a smattering of a few people who I trust. I mean, there's a lot of garbage on TubeView, as you might expect, people who borrowed from other YouTube shows. So I look at these particular individuals. I've been watching them, looking at their lectures for quite a while to get some sort of background on Frankism within the Eastern European Jewish community, which migrated to the U.S., of course, which the Paltrows would have been part of it. And as I alluded to earlier, I think the Danner side of the family was part of it in the Caribbean. And they migrated to the U.S. mainland around the time, just before the American Civil War. I think they were in the Bahamas, but I think they were conversos themselves. That's my guess. That's not in the book here. So in other words, and they probably came from a rabbinical line as well. So then you have the convergence in Gwyneth Paltrow. So here's this one scholar, I think he teaches at Yeshiva University, who teaches also these YouTube courses. Not everything on YouTube is terrible. Okay, there's some good material on YouTube, and I learned a lot from this individual here who talks about Jacob Frank.
History. Okay, here we go. Jacob Frank was born to a middle-class Jewish family in Poland in 1726. His family, like many middle-class families of that era, were secretly worshippers of Shabbatai Tzvi, who in the 17th century had created a tremendous uprising in the Jewish world by proclaiming himself as the Messiah. His particular story ended very badly, as he ultimately converted to Islam, but many of his followers were really quite active still well into the 18th century, both in Eastern Europe and also throughout the Mediterranean basin. Many of them even followed him into apostasy to Islam and became a movement known as the Dunme. Jacob Frank, our subject, actually traveled to Smyrna and a few other places where there were large numbers of Sabbatians, and he was highly influenced by their teachings. Frank came back to Poland after actually a conversion to Islam as well, and gathered around him a large group of followers who were very interested in his charismatic leadership. In particular, he promoted an idea of purification through transgression, or avera lishma, a sin for the right reasons, as it were. And his movement was reputed to not only be involved in public desecration of the Sabbath and things like that, but even wild orgiastic rituals that were looked on with high levels of disfavor by the rabbis. He was denounced to the non-Jewish leadership of Poland, but his movement found a rather interesting sort of strategy to counter the attacks of the traditionalist communities. They argued that, in fact, they were not Talmudic Jews, they were Zoharistic Jews, meaning they were Kabbalistic Jews, and in fact the Kabbalah taught doctrines which were much closer to Christianity, in particular the idea of the Trinity. As a result, the church actually took Frank and his followers under their protection. In particular, a Bishop Dembowski of Poland argued that, in fact, the Frankists and their opponents should have a major disputation over the Talmud. This occurred in 1757, as the Frankists disputed with the traditionalist community over the role of the Talmud. The dispute was quite intense, but as these things often happen, ultimately the church decided in favor of the Frankists, and the Talmud was ordered burned in Poland. Some 10,000 volumes of Talmud were collected, a tremendous loss to the libraries of the Jews of that era. Frank ultimately led a very checkered career afterwards, converting to Christianity and attracting even more followers in his now third religion. He made something of a career of it, but he got into trouble with the authorities because of his ongoing antinomian activities.
Antinomian activity. You can see that just one guy, Jacob Frank, moves from Judaism through Islam and through Christianity, and indeed, currently in Christianity, there's a very strong undercurrent of what's called the Christian Kabbalah, with the same purpose in line, that is, inversion of everything in order to hasten the return of the Messiah, right? Liberation or redemption through transgression, through abomination, through desecrating the human body, the divine nature of humanity, animals, the world, creating artificial life, the golem, which is also part of the Jewish folklore, Kabbalistic folklore, part of the mythology. And of course, these ideas, these are heresies. These are not Orthodox Judaism. That's why when people like Nick Fuentes talks about monolithically, certain group Jews like this, he's only partially right. He's talking about a divergent, heretical wing of these individuals who did indeed come in large numbers to the United States and come to dominate a lot of key institutions, all the way down to current times. And Gwyneth Paltrow is one of these individuals who are executing this larger, generations-long agenda through cultural engineering. Put one of these into your womanhood. Let women lead man. Let's obliterate the whole idea of man, of gender, of family. And in this way, we can hasten the return of the Messiah. This I'm just paraphrasing this whole trend here. And of course, this whole very, very strong tendency within contemporary society, culture, and politics and institutions. This is why these problems keep recurring, by the way, if you haven't figured out by now, because we're not hitting the metaphysical groundings, the infrastructure of these sex rings and these trafficking and these drugs and all of it, right? We're not hitting it. We're not looking at the metaphysical, the spiritual bankruptcy of these organizations, these entities that have us under their thrall. It's magic. The spell can be broken, but it can only be done so, first of all, through, guess what? Knowledge. Information. I refer to my particular methodology as cultural forensics, but it's just a reading of history against the grain. And it's nothing that you're going to find at the university. It's nothing you're going to find in mainstream sociology or publishing. It's not going to be in the movies, because these institutions are all captured by those same, the descendants of that same bloodline. Do you get it? The university is the same way. University and the government. This is why if you're getting frustrated with Donald Trump, you're really barking up the wrong tree. He's simply a manifestation of this larger system, I guess I can call it. Right. So let's take a look from another perspective. This is a younger scholar, See what he has to say.
Vehemently defended Shabtai's messiahship, even after Shabtai's death, because he felt such a special connection to this idea. Shabtai's feet continued to lead his diminished movement. Living on a government stipend from the Ottoman Empire, he was visited by followers from across the Jewish world until he died in exile around the age of 50 in 1676. So how do we make sense of Sabbatianism? A movement that convinced a huge portion, if not most, of the Jewish world in a matter of months. Mass social and religious movements like this don't pop up in a cultural vacuum. Context is key, and scholars have spent a lot of time identifying the factors that laid the groundwork for Sabbatianism. In this case, it seems that the foundations of the Sabbatian movement involved mysticism and messianism, or aspects of theology that deal with a messiah or prophecies about the coming of a messianic age. Let's start with mysticism, or kabbalah. Kabbalah was the philosophical and social basis of the movement. Shabtai and most of the prominent founders of the movement were Kabbalists and drew their ideas from Kabbalistic texts such as the Zohar. I recommend that you refer back to my earlier introduction on Kabbalah, but to summarize, Kabbalah generally refers to a tradition of Jewish mysticism that emerged in southern Europe in the 12th century. Much of Kabbalistic teaching involves a system of 10 sfirot, or emanations of God, that are ordered in a hierarchy by how close they are to our...
Okay, that gets very specialized, and you can study that on your own. But what I'm trying to establish is that you saw the historian, the archivist, look through the records, and he was able to establish definitively the bloodline of Gwyneth Paltrow and her rabbis twofold over. And I'm adding to that a rabbinical line that was brought together in her parents, Danner and Paltrow. And she was the final chain in this generations long coming together. Right. And this is how she's been able to sustain this type of success. Beginning at a very fairly young age, not very many people are 23 years old and can say that they won an Academy Award. Right. Not to say that she's not talented. I'm saying, at least back then when she still was acting, she was an incredibly good actress. Right. I'm not denying that. But in addition to this, she has this other historical advantage, metaphysical advantage that she knows about. And this author here says she can't really understand why Gwyneth Paltrow has this sense of assuredness and being adult and being able to talk to anybody, go into any room and own it, even before she was a big shot and people were just hovering around her, kissing her butt, getting freebies from Valentino and from all the different sponsors that want to get a little bit of Paltrow magic. Some of the Kabbalistic dark magic, they want that in their products. Karl Marx, who was also from a rabbinic line, not coincidentally, he calls it fetishism. He calls it commodity fetishism. He wanted to destroy it. If he had only stayed with trying to understand the metaphysical roots of capitalism instead of trying to play political economist, we would have gotten a lot farther than we have. Talk about Marx. So that's her. You can read about it more in depth. I recommend it. You can read about Mario Batali, her forays into the cuisine field, right? Food. This is when foodieism became big. This is when the influencer was just getting underway. TikTok was not even invented yet when she first started, right? Yet there's all this convergence of these trends that she both was clued in on, just like the producers of South Park, and was also responsible for advancing the agenda. Jenny McCarthy. Oh, there is a section here, not a section, a paragraph that talks about Gwyneth Paltrow's skepticism about vaccines. And I'm not supposed to talk about it on TubeView, so I'm not going to go into it very deeply. But this author here is pro-vax. And she's kind of dinging Paltrow for taking the side of Jenny McCarthy, who claimed that her son was afflicted with autism because of the you-know-what. And she also mentions Dr. Andrew Wakefield, who's been vindicated. She does not mention the fact that Wakefield has been proven correct, Dr. Andrew Wakefield. Right? So unless you come to this material with this information, knowledge, you're not going to read this book in a sufficiently critical fashion. That's the service that I'm providing to you here on this super hot triple digit Sunday early evening. It's hot, ladies and gentlemen. I have the fans going on here because I don't like air conditioning. Thank you very much for allowing me to nerd out a little bit about Jewish mysticism. I haven't even scratched the surface. You got to read this material. It is wild, but it helps to explain why the gender revolution took place. All the people who were involved in that are Sabbatians. Maybe not explicitly, but they come out of that bag. The abolition of the difference between childhood and adulthood, right? That's all very much out of the mold. The fragmenting of the family. The Goy family, though, the Goyish family, the Christian family, yes, destroyed. It's a metaphysical war here. But the problem is that we have this information at hand. We're synthesizing all these disparate sources of information. And within the Jewish community itself, people are saying, this has got to stop. This is a blight on humanity. This goes counter to the Torah, the 5 books of Moses. Ironically, Gwyneth Paltrow named her son Moses. Her daughter was named Apple, as in, take a bite out of this, will you? So that's where the change is going to take place, ladies and gentlemen. Right. Bless her heart, Marjorie Taylor Greene. She can stomp her feet all she wants. Pam Bondi could issue a warrant for the arrest of Maduro for the tune of $50 million. President Donald Trump can fly up to Alaska and meet with President Vladimir Putin. But nothing's going to change unless we understand the metaphysics of evil that have overtaken the world. And the change will come from the Jewish community, the believers. And the rest of us will be there for the transformation as well. So on that positive note, ladies and gentlemen, on this hot Sunday afternoon, thank you very much for your attention. God willing, I'll be back with you next Sunday. I was glad to take a little break away from some of the dark and dismal topics that I've been pursuing for the last few weeks. Right, and going to why that was going to be something lighter, dealing with Gwyneth Paltrow, but it turns out to be even heavier than this other dark stuff, which is also a manifestation of the great evil that has descended upon us. So it all kind of fits in together, doesn't it? If you think so, please give me a thumbs up. Subscribe if you don't. Shalom Aleichem. All right. See you next Sunday, God willing. Bye.